Welcome to the Vedanta Society of Providence Sunday service. Tonight we have a guest speaker, Tushar Puranik, who will be speaking on Is Self-Realization Selfish? And we'll start with the opening prayer. And now it's not working. All right, no. All right, you can join in, please. We offer our salutations to the all-loving being who endows all beings with consciousness. We meditate on the Lord, who is the origin of the universe. Lord, thou abidest in all, thou art all, thou assumest all forms. Thou art the origin and goal of all. Thou art the self of all. Thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss. Salutations unto thee. May the world be peaceful. May the wicked become gentle. May all creatures think of mutual welfare. May their minds be occupied with what is spiritual and abiding. May our hearts be immersed in selfless love for the Lord. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So today I'll say a few words about our guest speaker. Tushar Puranik is a management consultant in the banking industry. He was born and raised in small towns in India, and his work has taken him to several countries. At present, he lives in New Jersey with his wife Mukta and his son Pranav. His interest in Vedanta is a legacy he received from his grandfather and father. Over the years, his curiosity about the Vedas has brought him closer to Vedanta. He has been associated with the Vedanta Society of Providence since 2003, an association that started with his wife Mukta, who has been associated with the Ramakrishna mission since her childhood. Tushar is attracted to both the mystical aspect of Vedanta and the practical aspect of Vedanta.
Charlie, thank you so much for that introduction. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us both. May He nourish us both. May we both acquire the capacity to study and understand the scriptures. May our study be illuminating. May we not hate each other. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. This is probably the first time a talk from this podium has been largely generated by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not a new thing. It has been around for a long time. But until recently, it meant taking large amounts of information and making intelligent decisions based on them. It did not have the capacity to generate anything. Recent developments in AI have developed what is called generative AI. This allows us to compose essays, create music, works of visual art, and so on. Large portions of what I'm about to present were composed by AI tools like ChatGPT. However, it wasn't as if I could provide Gen AI the topic and expect it to create this 1-hour talk. I provided some foundational ideas, and the AI helped compose pieces of the text that I had to then go over and make sure that it hung together and aligned with my style and messaging. I must admit, though, that I ended up changing large parts of the text that was generated by AI, since it did not match my style, emphasis, personal orientation, etc. We are probably only a step away from a robot standing on this podium and giving talks on profound truths of spirituality and Vedanta. As we navigate this new technological terrain, I must humbly acknowledge that my personal credibility and capability may well be inferior to such an advanced AI. AI is increasingly being able to parse through vast amounts of information, collate this information, and present it to suit the needs of specific communications. It is increasingly being able to give advice, adopt to various styles and personas, and create alter egos that are almost undistinguishable, something that we call deep fakes. For the purposes of today's discussion, I think that the value of the ideas presented here should be judged on their own merits and not on the physical agent involved in the process. So I suggest that whether these insights come from a human or a machine, kindly accept, reject, or challenge them on their own merit. However, there is still an important question about the role of human experience and intuition in spiritual discourse. While AI can provide us with accurate and comprehensive information, it only reproduces ideas expressed through experiential wisdom that come from a lived spiritual journey of the sages of the past. Therefore, while tools like AI may be the agents of such information, they cannot be source of truth and enlightenment. And at a more mundane level, AI has been very limited in replicating my personality and taste. Therefore, it is essential to strike a balance, leveraging the strengths of AI while also honoring the unique contributions of human insight and experience. I must say that in this narrative, I also included some stories and lessons learned from my associations with various swamis and sages that I have had the privilege and pleasure of interacting with. The ideas that I present today, though partially composed by AI, are meant to provoke thought, inspire reflection, and encourage dialogue. Let us engage with them openly and critically, recognizing that the pursuit of truth transcends the medium through which it is conveyed. Whether through human or artificial intelligence, our quest for understanding and enlightenment continues, guided by the timeless wisdom of Vedanta and the ever-evolving tools at our disposal. Now, obviously, the topic of today is not artificial intelligence. The topic of today's discussion is self-realization selfish? The words self-realization makes it appear like it is a very self-centered process. I will cover this topic today by first looking at what is selfishness and what is selflessness. We will then look at what is meant by self-realization. There's a lot of ideas associated with self-realization, so I want to visit that topic a little bit. Then we will explore if self-realization is really selfish or if it achieves any broader and selfless purpose. We will then take a look at some of the practical implications of this question so that we don't only deal with this question academically, but look at the practical aspects of it as well. So let's first get into the topic of what is selfishness. Selfishness is a trait, as you can imagine, this part came from AI. Selfishness is a trait characterized by a person's prioritization of their own needs, desires, and interests above those of others. It often involves a lack of consideration for the well-being or feelings of others. This leads actions that benefit oneself at the expense of others. Selfishness can manifest in various forms and degrees, from minor everyday actions to significant decisions that impact relationships and communities. This behavior is often considered inappropriate because it undermines social harmony and mutual respect. Selfish individuals may be seen as lacking empathy, being inconsiderate, or even manipulative. The essence of selfishness lies in the imbalance between self-interest and the interest of others, where the self-interest overwhelmingly dominates. We see several commonplace examples of selfish actions. For example, hoarding resources, wherein we hoard resources such as food, money, supplies, etc., without regard for others who may be in need. And this happens a lot in crisis situations, like natural disasters, pandemics. We witnessed that relatively recently. And everyone can appear to be a saint in the times of plenty. But our evil and selfish behavior is most manifest in the times of crisis. The other example of that is when we ignore others' needs. This happens a lot in personal relationships, where Let's say there are two partners in the relationship and one partner consistently prioritizes their own desires over others. So for example, I may insist on watching TV at night while my wife is sleeping and disturb her without really thinking about her sleep. Another common example from a professional perspective is where a lot of people take credit undeservedly. In professional settings, selfishness can manifest as taking credit for others' work. An employee might present a team project as their own effort, seeking praise and recognition while disregarding the contributions of their colleagues. This not only undermines the teamwork, but also creates a toxic work environment. The other example of this is refusing to help. So, refusing to help others when one is capable of doing so is another form of selfishness. For instance, a person might refuse to assist a colleague with a task even though they may have the time and expertise, simply because they do not want to be inconvenienced. Selfishness can have far-reaching consequences. It can damage relationships, erode trust, and create conflict. In communities, selfish behavior can lead to inequality and social fragmentation. On a larger scale, selfishness can contribute to systemic issues such as environmental degradation, where individuals or corporations prioritize profit over ecological sustainability. And we have all lived through times of social pressures. We are living in the times of global warming, all of these being caused by some form of selfishness. Let's now turn to what is selflessness. Selflessness is, as one would expect, the opposite of selfishness. Selflessness means to prioritize the needs, well-being, and interests of others above one's own. It is characterized by altruism, compassion, and a willingness to make personal sacrifices for the benefit of others. Selflessness is often celebrated as a virtue because it fosters community, strengthens relationships, and promotes social harmony. This behavior is often motivated by empathy, kindness, and a sense of moral duty. Selfless individuals are willing to go out of their way to help others, even if it means facing inconvenience or hardship themselves. And again, as we looked at some of the examples of selfishness, let's look at some of the examples of selflessness. One of the best examples of there is first responders in case of emergencies or our servicemen. It's amazing to see how they prioritize the lives of others. Like as we saw in the case of 9/11, they went in and tried to save people that they didn't even know. Our military puts their life at risk and is actually trying to do an amazing service to the nation. We really salute the heroism of our military and their acts of sacrifice for the country and the first responders. Another example of selflessness is that of organ donation, where donors who give their organs, whether to a family member or even to a stranger, they exhibit an extraordinary level of altruism. This act can save lives and improve the quality of life for recipients, often at a significant personal cost to the donor. Then there is this idea of volunteering in crisis situations. Volunteering during crises such as natural disasters or pandemics is another form of selflessness. Volunteers often put their own safety and comfort aside to provide aid, distribute supplies, and offer emotional support to those affected. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many healthcare workers and volunteers worked tirelessly, often in dangerous conditions, to care for the sick and support public health efforts. And again, we can only thank them for the efforts that they have put in. One of the most common, obviously, ways of displaying selflessness is the acts of charity, where people donate large amounts of money that they have earned with a lot of difficulty, and they just give it out in form of charity. Or they put in their own personal effort, time, and resources in charitable acts. This is another example of selflessness. And then there are common acts of kindness in daily life where there may be simple gestures like helping a neighbor with groceries, mentoring a colleague, or offering emotional support to a friend in need. These are all good examples of what you observe selflessness in day-to-day living. Another example which is given, it's heralded as one of the best examples of selflessness, is that of the mother's love for a child. It's often heralded as the ultimate example of selflessness. From the moment of conception, a mother begins to prioritize her child's needs above her own enduring physical discomfort, emotional stress, and countless sleepless nights. This unwavering dedication continues as she nurtures, protects, and sacrifices for her child's well being and happiness. Whether it's staying up late to comfort a sick child, working tirelessly to provide for the family, or putting her own dreams on hold to support her child's aspirations. A mother's love is characterized by acts of pure altruism. And again, we have our mothers to thank for everything that they have done for us. Selflessness, as you can imagine, has a ripple effect, creating a positive impact that extends beyond the immediate act. It strengthens social bonds, builds trust, and fosters a sense of community. In professional settings, selflessness can lead to a more collaborative and supportive work environment. Selfless acts can inspire others to act similarly, creating a culture of compassion and mutual aid. Having looked at what is selfishness versus what selflessness, I now really want to ask the question of, when we look at all these ideas of selflessness, is selflessness truly selfless? All the above acts of selflessness that we discussed look really grand. And quite honestly, we all aspire to do them. Not only do we aspire to do them, we teach others to do them. These are the values that we inculcate in our own children. But let's take a closer look at the anatomy and psychology of these so-called selfless actions. At the heart of all our actions are the ideas of me and mine that Sri Ramakrishna warned us a lot about. We take on an identity. I take on an identity. I define who I am, and then it automatically turns what is mine. And every action that I perform is ultimately towards the fulfillment of that I or that mine. So let's take a few examples. So if I take an identity of the husband, I automatically define my wife as mine. And then I work towards whatever I want to do for myself or for my wife. And that's what defines all my actions, because I have defined my identity as a husband. And at this point, could you say that what I'm doing for my wife is selfless? Well, in some sense, yes, in some sense, no, right? The same idea is with the idea of a son or a father. So if I'm a son, then my father is who I do actions towards. If I'm a father, I take similar actions towards my son. One could argue that the same thing applies for the mother-child relationship that we heralded as a very selfless act. Ultimately, a mother works towards her own child, right? Then there is this idea of duty that we talked about in the case of firemen, soldiers, etc. And again, it's interesting when you see in these war situations or in these conflict situations that that we associate ourselves with one side versus the other. And then everything that we do towards that one side is what is considered as virtue, and everything that you do towards the other side is considered as negative, right? So again, there's this idea of what is mine that kinds of defines all our actions. Similarly, all acts of goodness, charity that we do, they are defined by the society that we belong in or that we identify with. So if there is no personal connection, these things often do not warrant our attention or benevolence. This understanding highlights the conditional nature of our selflessness, which is often limited by our personal associations and identifications. Let's now take a look at the acts of charity. These acts of giving are intended to benefit others without seeking personal gain or recognition. However, we often notice that these acts of charity are publicized, often through social media, press releases, or other public platforms, with the ostensible intention of inspiring others, but the real intention of gaining name, fame, and attention for oneself, and in several cases, aimed at achieving commercial gains. Jesus had said that one hand should not know what the other is doing. He meant that when we perform acts of charity, we should do so in secrecy. For those who do it secretly, their award awaits them in heaven. In contemporary society, however, there is a growing trend to publicize the charitable acts. Organizations and individuals alike often showcase their philanthropic efforts to gain social approval, enhance their public image, or even benefit commercially. While this can have the positive effect of raising awareness and encouraging others to contribute, which is definitely a bit of a positive side to that, it more often turns a humble act into a loud proclamation of one's generosity, leading to greater egotism. The original intent of charity becomes overshadowed by the desire for recognition and praise. The act of giving in such cases no longer remains selfless, but becomes a selfish, egotistic endeavor aimed at enhancing one's own image rather than genuinely assisting those in need. We are even teaching our children to loudly proclaim their acts of charity, rather than using these to build humility and purity of mind to perform these acts as selfless acts of service. Another problem with our acts of charity is that it often becomes an act in propagating one's own ideas and beliefs, sometimes to the detriment of others. We set out to do good to others. But the real question is, what is the definition of good? And the answer for most part is that we define good based on what we believe good is. It becomes a matter of our opinion. And we start imposing these opinions on others. And there are many, many examples of this. So if, for example, I'm a non-smoker, then I would believe that smoking is a bad thing, right? And I would basically propagate that smoking is a bad thing. If I'm a vegetarian, which I am, then I start propagating vegetarianism. And so it's my idea of good that I start imposing on others. The reality is that there is absolutely no absolute definition of good and bad. It is relative. The other issue with the acts of charity is that it is accompanied with this sentiment of compassion. The idea is that I have more wealth than you do. I have the idea of what is good for you. I am capable and you are not. I am morally superior and more generous, and hence I am extending this help for you. We therefore stand on a high pedestal and offer a few cents to someone far below and call it compassion. In reality, it is not compassion, but condensation, which basically means looking down on others. The effect is that it only inflates our ego. Our acts of selflessness are often nothing more than an eyewash, masking the inherently selfish motives that drive them. When we inspect the motive power in our works, we find that in most cases we have selfish motives. At their core, these acts are designed to fulfill an expanded idea of self, rather than genuinely serving others. By expanding our idea of self to include others, we create a broader scope for our selfishness. We construct an idealized version of ourselves as altruistic and compassionate, and then engage in actions that reinforce this self-image. This expanded self-concept allows us to derive satisfaction and a sense of moral superiority from our actions, while still operating within the framework of self-interest. This process is inherently deceptive, as we fool ourselves into believing that we are acting out of pure benevolence, when in reality, we are satisfying our own psychological and emotional needs. For instance, when we donate to charity or volunteer our time, we often do so to feel good about ourselves, to gain social approval, or to alleviate our own guilt. These motivations, while seemingly noble, are rooted in self-serving desires. Not motivations, but these actions, seemingly noble, actually have self-serving motivations. We seek to fulfill our own emotional and psychological needs through our interactions with others, thereby making our acts of selflessness inherently selfish. Let me now assert and make this point worth reflection, that not only is that selflessness may under some circumstances be selfish, but that all our actions are inherently selfish. Therefore, all acts of selfishness are nothing but selfish acts appearing in the nice and colorful clothing called selflessness. And to substantiate this, I would like to explore the systemic basis for selfishness. Where does this selfishness really come from? What is the source of this? So I'll go to the lessons from Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It takes us to the root of this psychology. It says that it is for one's own sake that one loves the other, suggesting that our idea of love for others or all actions towards others are ultimately self-referential. We see the I in others and therefore we love them and work towards them. Whenever we see this reflection of this I, we call it mine. So it actually goes on to say that it is not for the child's sake that the mother loves the child, but it's the mother sees the mother in the child and hurts the mother loves the child, and goes on talking about this. So this perspective challenges the conventional understanding of selflessness, even the idea of love, revealing that our so-called altruistic actions are fundamentally selfish and directed towards the ones where we see the reflections of ourselves, and in other words, what we consider as mine, as we had seen a little before. Our idea of I, in most of our cases, starts with this body. This body is not my body. It is verily I. So we identify with our body. And therefore, pretty much everything we do is driven by the pursuit of comfort and the sustenance of our bodies. Our pursuits are not only limited to the fulfillment of the needs of our own body, they extend into all the other bodies that we associate with. Therefore, our father, mother, spouse, children, the place where the body lives, the place where the body visits, etc., they all become the extensions of our body. And our actions are directed towards all these associations. This is the expanded idea of self that we had discussed before, but body being the anchor around which this expansion happens. Then there is another fundamental thing to look at, and this is a very interesting conversation, in fact, that I had with my son relatively recently. That is the idea of an inherent conflict in our existence. There is an inherent conflict in our very existence. Our very survival necessitates the consumption of resources at the expenses of other living beings. And again, in the times of plenty, it may not be obvious, but imagine two people in the room with one pizza, right? The food we eat, the clothes we wear, and the shelter we seek all contribute to the sustenance of our bodies, but they also employ the exploitation of resources that could have been used by others. So, when a tiger eats a deer, this action is beneficial for the tiger but detrimental to the deer. Does this mean that the tiger should die of starvation and not eat? This inherent conflict exists in any action that we undertake. What is good for one is bad for another. And if we are ignorant, so this is a fact, but if we are ignorant, what we do is we feverishly engage in seeking what is good for us. And if we are a little knowledgeable about this idea of conflict, then we have no choice but still helplessly engage in it. So the idea being, we have no choice but to be selfish. Another masterly piece of work that actually proves this point really well is the work by Sir Richard Dawkins, where he talks about the concept of the selfish gene, where he says that our core biology is inherently selfish. Our genetic makeup drives us to act in ways that ensures our survival and reproduction, often at the expense of others. Dawkins says that organisms, including humans, are essentially survival machines, created by genes to ensure their own replication and survival. Central to Dawkins' thesis is the metaphor of the selfish gene, which suggests that genes behave in ways that enhance their own survival prospects, often appearing selfish. It also explains how seemingly altruistic behaviors can evolve. For instance, kin selection theory elucidates how genes promoting altruism towards relatives can spread, as helping kin indirectly aids the survival of the shared genes, which means that we help our communities so that they can flourish and we can flourish in turn. Dawkins also introduces the concept of memes, which, by the way, is a very commonly spoken internet word these days. But he was the one who spoke about it for the first time, which is basically units of cultural transmission and analogs to genes, which propagate ideas, behaviors, and cultural phenomena through imitation and communication that ultimately help in their own survival and propagation. So, Richard Dawkins' idea of self preservation and sustenance is not just physical, but also mental and psychological. In other words, if you really compile all of these things together, what do we conclude? We are wired to be selfish. We have fundamental forces of biology, psychology, the question of self sustenance, the inherent desire for self expansion that make all our acts, even the ones that we normally consider as selfless, as essentially selfish acts. Let me now turn to the idea of self realization. And let's spend a few minutes just talking about what do we mean by self realization. And the other important question that we will explore is, like all our actions, since we said we are so much wired in selfishness, is the idea of self-realization also selfish, which is the topic of today. So getting a bit into self-realization, it is often understood to be that ultimate state of being where one is eternally happy. It is associated with the ideas of everlasting ecstasy, everlasting contentment, inner peace, fulfillment, no hankering for material objects, and so on. Some state this as a profound awareness and understanding of one's true self, transcending the superficial layers of identity constructed by societal norms, personal experiences, and ego, which means that you transcend all the given identities and go into something which is your real true self. It is a state of enlightenment where an individual recognizes one's intrinsic nature, a higher and transcendental consciousness that provides a deeper connection with the divine or the universe. So we make a connection between ourselves and the divine, or make a connection between us and the universe, or all three of them. While some see it as withdrawing from the world into their own zone of existence with minimal reliance on the world, others see it as not about withdrawing from the world, but engaging with it more fully and authentically. It means living in alignment with one's true nature and values and contributing to the well-being of others. Now, commonly speaking, self-realization is associated with a lot of various practices, some of them religious, some of them non-religious, but essentially some religious practices, rituals, and the pursuit of moral and ethical living. People often associate various actions and practices with this journey, each aimed at fostering a sense of spiritual awakening and personal growth. One of the most widely recognized practices is yoga. Yoga is normally understood as twisting the body in various physical postures, performing breath control to promote physical health, mental clarity, and hopefully spiritual well-being. It is seen as a holistic practice that aligns body, mind, and spirit, and helping individuals to transcend their physical limitations and connect with their inner selves. Meditation is another cornerstone of yoga and spiritual practice. It involves focusing the mind and eliminating distractions to achieve a state of heightened awareness and inner calm. Through meditation, individuals seek to quiet the constant chatter of the mind, gain insight into their true nature, and experience a sense of unity with the cosmos. And there's a reason why I'm going through some of these practices, because one would argue, if you're sitting in meditation, how could you be selfless? One of the saints that he gave the talk on this said, well, at least you're not being nuisance to others. But we'll keep talking about a few of the others. Another one is karma yoga, or the path of selfless action. It is also closely associated with spirituality. This is normally understood as performing acts of charity and service without any expectation of reward or recognition, which is what we are talking about today. So hopefully this expands this topic a little more. But then for some, spirituality involves a more adventurous spirit, such as traveling to Himalayas or other remote serene locations to find oneself. Many people believe that the isolation and natural beauty of such places, they provide a perfect setting for introspection, meditation, and communion with the divine. In addition to these practices, people engage in various other activities to nurture their spiritual lives. These include attending religious services, participating in spiritual retreats, reading sacred texts, and engaging in rituals and ceremonies. Some also practice mindfulness in their daily lives, striving to live in the present moment and appreciate the simple joys of life, etc. The problem with all of these definitions and ideas of self realization is that these are mere words. And in all candor, most of us don't fully understand. We have our ideas of happiness, and we want this happiness to last forever. Most of the times, these ideas are borrowed from our worldly experiences. As an example, our definition of heaven is a place with unlimited resources, experiences pleasing to our senses, and no need for any effort, and no experience of pain or anguish. Some people also have certain ideas of ecstasy based on their experiences with certain psychedelic drugs. And I'll be candid, I too do not claim to understand what self realization is. But let's attempt to get a glimpse into it, first starting with a story and then looking at how Vedanta describes it. So there is this beautiful story that actually now takes all of these religious practices that we talk about, all spiritual practices, and then gets into the idea of what we think self-realization could be. I love the story. So once upon a time, in a lush, vibrant forest, a curious little bird fluttered around, exploring its surroundings and going around merrily. One day, it stumbled upon a shiny reflective surface, a mirror, left behind by some wandering humans. Intrigued, the bird hopped closer and gazed into the mirror. To its astonishment, it saw another bird staring back at it. "Who is this intruder?" thought the bird, feeling a sudden surge of territorial anger. It puffed up its feathers and with a determined squawk lunged at the reflection, pecking fiercely with its beak. To its dismay, the other bird mirrored its aggression, pecking back with equal fervor. Confused and frustrated, the bird stepped back, only to see the other bird doing the same. It decided to take a more drastic approach. With a burst of energy, it flew at the mirror with all its might, hoping to scare the intruder away. But the reflection met its charge head on, and the bird found itself in a painful collision with the hard surface. Agonized and bewildered, the bird paused to think. It cautiously walked behind the mirror, and to its relief, the other bird disappeared. "Ah, it's gone," it chirped, feeling a momentary sense of victory. However, as soon as it returned to the front of the mirror, the reflection reappeared, staring back with the same intensity. Determined to rid itself of this persistent foe, the bird tried various strategies. It started with yoga, stretching its wings and balancing on one leg, hoping that yoga will make the bird go away. But the reflection remained steadfast. Next, the bird closed its eyes and meditated, seeking inner peace. Yet, as soon as it opened its eyes, the reflection was still there, unwavering. Desperate, the bird began to repeat the name of God, chirping prayers with fervent devotion. But as soon as it opened up the eyes, the reflection did not waver. It even tried acts of charity, sharing its food with other forest creatures, hoping that the good deeds would make the reflection disappear. Alas, the reflection remained, unmoved by the bird's efforts. Finally, exhausted and disheartened, the bird sat quietly in front of the mirror, contemplating its predicament. In that moment of stillness, a realization dawned upon it. The bird in the mirror was not an intruder, but its own reflection. The battle it had been fighting was with itself. With this newfound understanding, the bird no longer felt threatened. It accepted the reflection as a part of its existence and flew away, embracing the forest with a lighter heart and a clearer mind. The mirror remained, but the bird had learned that true peace comes from recognizing that the image is not real, but only the reflection of the true bird. What is the moral of the story? All the acts of charity, repeating God's name, yoga, meditation, etc., they in themselves do not lead to realization. What is needed is a clear understanding of what is apparent versus what is real. So, what is this understanding? Let's look at the Vedantic perspective of this. And you've all been to a lot of Vedanta lectures, so some of this might feel repetitive, but it's really good to reflect on the ideas of Vedanta in the context of this, and then get to the question of how much of this is selfish versus selfless. So Vedanta teaches us that we are not merely our physical bodies, but a limitless existence known as Brahman. The Upanishads, the ancient scriptures that underpin Vedantic thought, tirelessly reiterate this fundamental truth. For instance, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad proclaims, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, emphasizing that our true nature transcends the physical form and is one with the infinite reality. Similarly, the Chandogya Upanishad declares, Tattvamasi, thou art that, urging us to recognize our essence as identical to the ultimate reality, which is Brahman. These teachings challenge the conventional notion of self, urging us to look beyond the superficial layers of identity tied to our bodies and minds. The Upanishads also make it clear that the concept of I is an illusion, just like the reflection was an illusion. The idea of a separate individual self is a product of ignorance and is the root cause of all suffering, just as the bird was suffering. The Mandukya Upanishad says, Ayam Atma Brahma, this self verily is Brahman, indicating that the individual self Atman and the universal self Brahman are one and the same. There is no separate I. Brahman alone exists. This realization is the essence of self-realization in Vedanta, where the illusion of individuality is dissolved, revealing the oneness of all existence. To realize this profound truth, Vedanta offers two primary approaches. The first approach is to see everything as Brahman, recognizing that there is no separate I. This path involves dissolving the ego and understanding that all distinctions are illusory. By perceiving the world as a manifestation of Brahman, one transcends the false notion of individuality. The second approach is to expand the idea of I to encompass everything, realizing that there is nothing but I. This method leads to the understanding that the individual self is not separate from universal self, and there is no second entity apart from Brahman. And these two methods are called as the method of iti iti and neti neti. Iti means this is everything, neti means there's nothing else but me, but God. Now let's turn to the question of whether the idea of self-realization is selfish. Are all the acts performed towards self-realization essentially selfish acts? After all, the word self-realization has self in it. So quite ostensibly, it seems to be a selfish endeavor. So if I am working towards self-realization, I am being selfish. And as we said before, we are wired to be selfish. So if we are acting towards self-realization, it must be a selfish act. It turns out that this cannot be farther from the truth. Let's see how. First, I would like to point out that the word self in selfishness and selflessness points at an individual self, usually our body or our ego, or as we have seen, an expanded sense of our ego that may include and exclude some others. Nevertheless, even this expanded sense of self is limited. However, the word self in self-realization is pointing to the universal and unlimited self that lies well beyond the body, the mind, and the ego, or any such limited ideas. So, by the very definition of self-realization, it is opposite of what we would call as selfish. The concept of self-realization, particularly as understood in Vedanta, fundamentally revolves around the dissolution of ego and the recognition of a higher truth, either by realizing that there is no I or by understanding that everything is I. In this context, the notion of selfishness becomes irrelevant. How can one who perceives no individual I perform any selfish act? Such a person operates from a place where individual desires and purposes are subsumed by an all-encompassing reality of Brahman. Actions performed by someone who has realized this truth are not driven by personal gain or egoistic motives, but are expressions of the divine will. To delve deeper into this, let us first explore the idea that there is no I. According to Vedanta, the individual self or ego is an illusion created by ignorance or avidya. The true self is the Atman, which is identical to Brahman, the ultimate reality. When one realizes that there is no individual I, the basis for selfish actions disappears. Selfishness arises from the belief in a separate self that has its own desires, fears, and objectives. However, if this separate self is an illusion, then the desires and objectives associated with it are also illusory. A person who has transcended the ego acts not out of personal interest, but as an instrument of divine will. Now let us consider the opposite view, that everything is I. This perspective is equally transformative. When one realizes that they are not just a limited individual, but the entire universe, their sense of self expands to include all of existence. In this state, the idea of acting selfishly becomes inconceivable, just as one hand of the body cannot think of harming the other, or one part of the body cannot act against the other. A person who has realized the universal I cannot engage in actions that harm any part of the whole. All parts work in harmony, contributing to the greater good of the entire organism. In both approaches to self realization, the dissolution of the individual or the ego leads to a state where selfishness is not just undesirable but impossible. The individual self, with its limited desires and objectives, is transcended, and actions are aligned with the universal will or the collective good. However, we still want to come back to the topic that we talked before, which is our mere existence, we saw, is fraught with conflict. What happens in that tiger deer scenario that we talked about? We know that we must eat to sustain. Our existence comes at the cost of another. Our duties create inherent conflict, as when a person has to take care of his or her family. Such conflicts exist only as long as the body identification exists. All conflicts disappear in this state of self-realization. The tiger, remember in the tiger deer story, the tiger no longer sees deer as any different from the tiger. The process of eating is only a natural process, and the tiger is identified neither with the eater nor the eaten. So in eating the deer, the tiger is simply performing an action with no identification. So whence can the idea of selfishness even exist? To maybe make it a little bit simpler, when I think of myself as a tiger and something else as the deer, as you start thinking about I am everything, you're no longer thinking of the deer being different from you. You kind of sublimate yourself to a much higher view to say, well, at the end of the day, it's all a natural process that I'm a part of. And since, once you think about that, there is no such idea of selfishness. The idea of selfishness arises when we think of ourselves as a tiger or deer. When we realize that we are the nature, and the nature is busy performing its routine acts, the conflict goes away from the act of eating. Similar idea applies to the call of duty. When a hangman hangs a convict, no conflict arises as long as the hangman recognizes that he is only executing the law of the land. One may argue that there is no selfishness when one becomes self-realized. So all these are when you become self-realized, yeah, fine. The idea of selfishness goes away. But what about most of us who are kind of on our journey towards self-realization? Are we being selfish or are we being selfless? Well, the answer is both yes and no. Let's see how. To the extent that we are focused on the sustenance of the body, taking care of its comforts, our preferences, and acting with ego, we are bound to be selfish. These actions are driven by the needs and desires of the individual self, which is inherently limited and separate. However, the pursuit of self-realization transcends these egoistic motives and becomes the greatest good that one can do for mankind. Now we'll go deeper into this topic. While we are on the path of self-realization, our normal human and social functions continue as usual. We still need to eat, sleep, earn money, manage our relationships, perform our duties, etc. And as we have seen, there are obvious conflicts in performing these functions. So to the extent that we are aware of our individual and separate existence, selfishness will remain. However, the notable difference on the path to self-realization is that of intent and focus. A person on the path of self-realization performs these functions, but the focus is on realizing the truth, the oneness of all existence, and to dissolve the individual ego. There is diminishing interest in self-preservation, self-aggrandizement, and pleasure-seeking. This alone makes this path selfless. Let's analyze this from the point of view of the few reasons why we had said we are inherently selfish, and apply this for someone who is on the pursuit of self-realization. We gave ourselves very strong arguments for why we are inherently selfish, so it's not going to be easy for us to walk out of that. So as bodies, remember we said we are a body. So as bodies, we tend to act selfishly. When we are in pursuit of self-realization, we do continue to perform physical actions. But the pursuit of self-realization requires that we no longer pursue the comfort and pleasures of the body. We make efforts to progressively reduce such actions. Thus, to the extent that we eliminate such action, we have made progress towards being less selfish. We had also seen our genetics and our biology is inherently selfish. How does that change with the pursuit of self-realization? The journey of self-realization is not to assert our biological nature, but to swim upstream against it. This journey is from the biological to the spiritual, from the untruth to truth, from darkness to light. So, while our biological basis makes us inherently selfish, our pursuit of self-realization is the exact opposite. It is to shun all our selfishness. One may ask the question of, well, the core of the biology is sustenance, and how do you really shun your sustenance? There's an amazing story from the life of Swami Vivekananda, where he was in this sort of state of trance, and he was walking on the streets of Calcutta, and he saw the traffic approaching towards him, and he felt no urge to move away. He had no fear of getting killed, and that tells you that on that path, even the fear of getting extinguished is no longer there. We had also looked at the idea from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that only when we see the reflection of ourselves in others that we love them. Are we not still inspired to act with an extended sense of selfishness? Yes, it is true that our inherent unity manifests in the form of love towards the objects where we see our reflection. However, what changes for the person on the path of self-realization is that we no longer see I in some and not in others. To the extent that we perceive this unity, we are being selfless. How can our pursuit and focus on self-realization help others? So this is the other idea that we originally came up with. Like, well, we may be meditating, but how does that help somebody else? And somehow this question comes naturally to us because we have grown up learning that our pursuits must be beneficial to others around us. So Swami Vivekananda looks at this idea of help and gets into the anatomy of this particular idea. He basically says that the help can be of three types: physical, mental, and spiritual. Physical help, such as providing food, is essential but momentary. So you provide somebody food for some time, a day later he'll be hungry. It addresses immediate needs but does not offer lasting solutions. Mental help, like education, is superior because it equips individuals with the knowledge and skills to sustain themselves throughout their lives. With education, they can feed themselves. Education can transform lives, enabling people to rise above their circumstances and contribute meaningfully to society. However, spiritual help is supreme. It goes beyond the material and intellectual realms to address the very essence of human existence. Helping someone achieve self-realization is the highest form of service because it enables them to understand their life's purpose and their true nature as infinite, all-pervading consciousness. And the reason why it is supreme is because from the perspective of the other person, self-realization is the only goal of life that can remove miseries forever. So helping someone in this path is the highest form of help one can provide. Another key aspect of the pursuit of self-realization is that it does not require one to do something different or think differently or to do good to others. Swami Vivekananda observes that we have enduring impact of our thoughts. He teaches us that our thoughts are not confined by space and time. When we think good thoughts, they leave impressions in the environment. These impressions can benefit anyone who, who comes into that space later. Moreover, our good thoughts can transcend physical boundaries and influence people far away. This concept highlights the far reaching effects of a person in pursuit of self realization. Such a person who constantly thinks of spiritual well being, of realizing God, and of fulfilling life's purpose is doing the greatest good. Their thoughts and actions create positive vibrations that can uplift and inspire others, even across great distances and through future generations. In summary, the journey towards self realization may involve some degree of selfishness due to the needs and desires of body and mind. It is ultimately a path of profound selflessness. The pursuit of self realization is not about personal gain, but about aligning oneself with universal truth and contributing to the collective one being. We'll now turn a little bit towards the practical implications, as I said, we would discuss. This whole debate on whether self realization is selfish or selfless may sound very academic. How does it really matter whether it is selfish or selfless? If it is selfish and gets me to the state of eternal happiness, then so be it. What do I care about what does it do to others, one may think? And if it is selfless, what purpose does it serve than making us feel morally comforted that we are not being narrow-minded and selfish? Here's where Swami Vivekananda actually talks about in Karma Yoga. He says, supposing this absolute unselfishness can be reached by a man, what becomes of him? He is no more the little Mr. So-and-so. He has acquired infinite expansion. The little personality which he had before is now lost to him forever. He has become infinite, and the attainment of this infinite expansion is indeed the goal of all religions and of all moral and philosophical teachings. The important point here is it's not my point of view that I am putting on somebody else. This is the essence of all moral and philosophical teachings. If a man works without any selfish motive in view, does he not gain anything? Yes, he gains the highest. Unselfishness is more paying, only people do not have the patience to practice it. It is more paying from the point of view of health also. Love, truth, and unselfishness are not merely moral figures of speech, but they form our highest goals. He goes on to say, the man who can work unselfishly for even 5 minutes without thinking of future, of heaven, of punishment, or anything of that kind, has in him the capacity to become a powerful moral giant. It is the greatest manifestation of power. The other practical benefit of this is that it actually gives you the foundation for all morality. The core question here is, why should we do good to others? As bodies and separate minds with borders defined by our egos, we have no intrinsic reason to do anything but be anything but selfish. Our seemingly selfish acts often serve to fulfill this self in roundabout and deceptive ways. It is only when we realize that there is no I, or there is nothing but I, that we can actually do nothing else but charity. And we can be nothing else but selfless. And so this forms the foundation of all morality. And remember, we talked about the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad teaching that ultimately I see myself everywhere. That gives you the foundation for why I should do good to anybody else, because you're not doing good to anybody else. You're doing good to yourself. And the other important idea that comes in Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga is that the act of charity, we talked a lot about charity today. The idea of charity is not to benefit others, but it is to benefit the performer of the charity. It is an opportunity to perform an act of charity and a chance to transcend the ego. There's a very beautiful saying by Kabir Das. He actually said this as I'm trying to give a gift to someone. He says, "Jo jo kar upar kare, tyon tyon niche nain," which means that as I raise my hands to give an offering to you, I lower my eyes in due respect that you have given me this opportunity to provide the service to you. It's a completely opposite view from you standing on a pedestal and dropping a penny to help somebody else. This perspective shifts the focus from the recipient to the giver, emphasizing that the act of giving is a means to dissolve the ego and realize the interconnectedness of all beings. We should not be standing on the high pedestal, take 5 cents and say, "Here, my poor man." You need to be grateful to the poor man that he has given you the opportunity to actually better yourself. One last point I will make about the practical benefit of this is that it really helps us understand our relationship with the world. It teaches us that the world cannot be changed. Who are we to change the world that the incarnations of God like Jesus, Krishna, or Buddha could not change? The world is a gymnasium provided to us to strengthen our spiritual muscles, to help develop and test our resolve to realize our true self. This understanding helps remove our stubbornness and ego, allowing us to find harmony in acts of working towards self-realization. And I really look at the motto of the Ramakrishna mission, Atmana Mokshartam Jagad Hidayacha, which basically means for one's own salvation and for the welfare of the world. What I find amazing about this motto is that it really takes this idea of self-realization and benefit to the world in one sentence, and actually says that this should be how we should operate in the world. In conclusion, it seems to me that far from being selfish, self-realization is the only thing that is truly selfless. And I'll make 3 observations. I'll make 3 observations. First is that all actions that we perform in the world with the sense of our ego, with the sense of subject-object duality with body consciousness, these actions can only be egocentric, aimed at external objects as a way of fulfillment of the incompleteness of the subject, which is in constant pursuit of external objects. Such actions are selfish in essence. So if I am constantly seeking external objects for my own fulfillment, they are obviously selfish in nature. The only actions that are performed by transcending this limited ego, eliminating the duality, are the ones that can be called truly selfless. And I can also say that any action performed with the intent of self-realization becomes a selfless action. Self-realization is that I, if added to all the zeros of our action, that provides the value and meaning to all of them. And finally, I must say that one who consistently performs selfless actions is verily self-realized. It is not only that self-realization is selfless, but it is that selflessness itself is self-realization. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, that is perfect. This is perfect. The perfect comes from the perfect, and removing perfect from the perfect, perfect alone remains. Thank you. Sure, if you have time. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. What you say is totally logical, but psychologically it can be a little difficult to accept some of the things. How do you accept it psychologically as well as logically?
So what specific aspects do you mean, Charlie?
Well, saying that we're always selfish if we're not self-realized and things like that.
I think, it's always, we have our heart and our mind, right? Our heart tells us one thing, our mind tells us another, so that conflict always exists. But at the end of the day, I think we have somehow put labels on these words like selfish and selfless, and somehow come to the conclusion that selfishness is a bad thing and selflessness is a good thing. But when you really start to, as Swami Vivekananda says, if you start really looking at the motives of your actions and truly introspect and determine what is truly driving you to do something, and when you determine that in some roundabout way, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is selfish. I think being able to eliminate those types of actions and those types of motivations is ultimately what I think we should work towards. And I think that that introspection can probably remove this conflict that you're talking about, because there's really no conflict. I think it's just I think it's only at it's only at a surface, right? Once you start dissecting it, that there is really no such conflict.
Hey, thank you. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to say this correctly, but it seemed that you provided a puzzle that you didn't answer in when you had mentioned AI. And in a sense, when we have to make decisions, what is self and what is selfless, we're provided with prompts. And in our society today, there is an AI behind driving a lot of impulses and prompts. And when we think of the little bird in front of a mirror, and it's a flat object that has no existence other than it's a reflection, and with the new AI being more of a doppelganger, being more of a true reflection of our actions, where they more and more the AI is going to be a true representation of yourself, because it will know you even better than you probably know yourself. At what point is the self, as the little bird, how do we confront this new reality that seems to be beyond?
Yeah, I think it's a technological question. It's a pretty profound question for humanity. But I think what you're asking is probably maybe two separate questions with a little bit more emphasis on one. I think the heart of your question is, and help me if I got it right, is where artificial intelligence is going is creating replicas of yourself which are better than you and can potentially influence your life and how you deal with it. I'm not sure the connection of that with the idea of self-realization, but in my view, first of all, this is a very deep topic. There's a lot of research going on this topic. There's a lot going on. It's even at political levels, at universities and all that. So I don't think I'll be able to represent that appropriately. But I think from the point of view of where we sit and talk about this today, at the end of the day, something like artificial intelligence is ultimately a tool that we create. And in the scheme of the physical, the mental, the spiritual reality of the world, it only sits at the bottommost layer of this pyramid. And we have a phenomenal amount of experience with dealing with all kinds of tools that have come about. Some that we have memories of, some we don't have memories of. I mean, there have been times when people have had access to phenomenal mental and psychic capabilities that were even more powerful than AI, to be honest with you. So we have phenomenal amount of experience as humans of dealing with these types of things. And at the end of the day, you got to deal with a tool like a tool. You use the tool for the purposes that are beneficial to you, and there's always a risk that any tool can be used to harm you. And then you have no choice but to put appropriate amount of governance, protection around these types of tools, access. And we do that with nuclear weapons today. So ultimately, we as a human society will need to come up with the appropriate level of security governance controls around AI so that it cannot harm us. I don't know if I completely answer your question, but that's directionally where I would go.
So, in a selfish pursuit, I guess it's the model is that my gain is at the expense of somebody else, right? And I propose, I mean, this is one of my, I propose that in the pursuit of self-realization, my gain cannot be at the expense of somebody else. Do you think this is universally true, that if my gain is at the expense of somebody else, I cannot call it, my path is not right for self-realization. Do you see an exception to that rule?
I think the answer to that question lies in the relative versus the absolute. All our actions in the relative sense have almost no choice but to be, there's good and bad duality on every action that we perform. So while it may be good, like if I'm being selfish, yes, it may be good for me, but in some ways it may be detrimental to another.
Yeah, to give an example, for example, if a son wants to pursue spiritual happiness, but pursue spiritual path, and a parent is not happy with that, right? And may have that, nurture that feeling that you are being selfish at the expense of our happiness. So that may or may not be true, because if that son is responsible for supporting their parents, that may be true. But if he's not, I mean, the parents are well off, and still they don't want to let the child go, then it's one should pursue in that case, right?
I think again goes back to it's a relative versus absolute, in that sense that, first of all, it's a very subjective question of we're making a relatively valid assumption that if the person is on the spiritual path, is good for that person. But what impact it has on others is something which is completely subjective. It ultimately depends on whoever that person is. And I could give, at a minimum, for example, you're basically taking a person out of economy, right? So while this may be great for the person, it may not be a great thing for the country. But on the other, as we just looked at, if I ultimately think good thoughts and I ultimately do good practices, those thoughts remain in time and space and they benefit others. So that's why I think you've got to think about it in those layers. And I don't think there's going to be an answer to say that if you take a particular action in this phenomenal world, that will only be good. That cannot be the answer unless you have reached to that ultimate state. And the only other way I could distinguish it, as I was thinking about it, was the idea of motive. That if in doing even my day-to-day actions, my motive is self-realization, then to that action, to that extent, I am being selfless, because I'm not doing those actions for the fulfillment of the purpose of an ego or a body or anything. Because which is why I defined selfishness up front. Because in a relative world, that's the best way we can define selfishness. But if you're working towards the fulfillment of a spiritual goal, that's a different self that we're talking about, and that inherently makes it a selfless act. I know it's a very, very difficult topic, but
Anything else? Anything upstairs? No, we're all.
thank you so much.
Okay, we'll have the closing prayer. We can all join in. May the divine, who is Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest himself unto us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. And thank you, Tushar, for a great talk, first of all. And what we have coming up, we have morning and evening meditations every day, morning from 5:30 to 7:30. On days when there are no services or classes, you come in through the back, and evening 7 to 8:30 Well, that's when there's no classes, you come in through the back, 'cause there's never a class first thing in the morning. Tuesday and Friday, we're having our regular study groups. Tuesday on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and Friday on stories from Srimad Bhagavatam. And next Sunday, October 6th, the talk will be by Swami Yogatmanandaji, Shiva, and Shakti. And now we have our Vesper service, which we call Arati, in here. You do have to take your shoes off if you're going in, followed by the soup supper downstairs, so you're all welcome to stay for that. Thank you. Not working on it.
Breaker of all our worldly bondage and adored by all, we adore you too. Endless Lord, assuming human form. Endless Lord, assuming human form. Transcendent yet filled with love. You free us from the stain of sin and ornament our world. Consciousness is a form. Your eyes always purified by knowledge. Your eyes always purified by knowledge. Looking at them, illusion is gone. Ocean of shining love and feeling, ever inebriated in your infinite love. Your feet always dear to your devotees. Your feet always dear to your devotees. On my boat to cross this world, revealed to us as God incarnate and the Lord of all things, helping us join with you. Your mind's always set in the divine light. Your mind's always set in the divine light. This we can see through your grace. Destroyer of our worldly sorrow and compassion soul, infinite is your word. Your life's offered for the world's deliverance. Your life's offered for the world's deliverance, saving us from darkness and fear. Renouncer of all lust and lucre, therefore you were always spurning sensual life. Lord of monks, you are the best of men. Lord of monks, you are the best of men. Grant to us pure love for you. You're fearless and you're free from doubting, with your mind very firmly resolved, causeless refuge of your devotees, causeless refuge of your devotees, renouncing caste and birth. Our treasure is your holy feet, which take us very soon across this puddle of light. You give love and even-sightedness. You give love and even-sightedness to remove our anguish here. Our treasure is your holy feet, which take us very soon across this puddle of light. You give love and even-sightedness. You give love and even-sightedness to remove our anguish here. Greetings to you, O Lord, beyond both speech and mind. Greetings to you, O Lord, beyond both speech and mind. Yet you are the basis of both. O Lord, yet you are the basis of both. Great light of all lights, blazing in the heart's gate. Great light of all lights, blazing in the heart's gate. Darkness is destroyed by your light. Oh Lord, darkness is destroyed by your light. Greetings to you, O Lord, beyond both speech and mind. Greetings to you, O Lord, beyond both speech and mind. Yet you are the basis of both. O Lord, yet you are the basis of both. Great light of all lights, blazing in the heart's gate. Great light of all lights, blazing in the heart's gate. Darkness is destroyed by your light. Oh Lord, darkness is destroyed by your light. Langa ranga bhanga, these are all the sounds of mridanga. Langa ranga bhanga, these are all the sounds of mridanga. Spiritual songs devotees are singing for your worship divine. Spiritual songs devotees are singing for your worship divine. Jaya Jaya for your worship divine. Hara Hara for your worship divine. Shiva Shiva for your worship divine. Breaker of all our worldly bondage and adored by all, we adore you too. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Auspicious and blessed, graciousness sublime, all noble ends you give to us, granting us refuge, all seeing Gauri, O Mother Divine. dissolution are your powers, eternal one, nature's real basis, nature's essence. O Mother Divine, our love to you. We come seeking refuge from anguish. Be our Savior through your deep concern. All our suffering remove, Goddess. O Mother Divine, our love to you. Victory, O Mother Divine, our love to you. Blessed Mother Divine, our love to you. Blessed Mother Divine, our love to you. Blessed Mother Divine, our love to you. Jai Shri Ram Krishna Dev Ki Jai. Jai Shri Sarda Devi Ki Jai. Jai Shri Swami Vivekananda Ki Jai. Jai Shri Buddhadev Ki Jai. Jai Shri Jesus Christ Ki Jai.